Hello, everyone. This is Radio OPAC. I am Jessie Glover, and we are here with Nicole Fleetwood. Nicole wrote Marking Time, Art in the Era, or I'm sorry, not Art in the Era, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration, a book that just has come out within the past month. And we are really thrilled to be able to talk a little bit with her about the process of writing the book and her primary discoveries in creating this piece. So welcome, Nicole. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Jessie. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. That's
and
very kind.
You're supposed to be in you were scheduled to be here in New York, right?
I was going to be coming to see the exhibition that was a part of your book, the MoMA PS1 exhibition, which hopefully will be rescheduled, right? After
Of course, because of Corona, all museums are closed, but the museum is committed to it, and we're hoping that it will open in the early fall.
That's amazing.
So it's going to happen. No one knows the timeline, just because everything is still in flux in terms of just where we are with this pandemic.
Absolutely.
But it will happen.
That's amazing. I'm really glad to hear that. And I'm going to reschedule my New York trip for that. And so Marking Time, Art in the Age of Mass Incarceration is a book with a pretty ambitious kind of project to document what is happening in terms of art being made in prisons now, in the moment that we're in now. And I'd love just to hear from you a little bit, Nicole, about why you took on this project. Why did you write this book?
I didn't intend for it to be as big as it is. You and I were just talking a little off screen about it.
Yeah.
It actually started, as you know, by my own family's experience with incarceration, visiting incarcerated relatives in Ohio. You and I, I'm familiar with many of the prisons that where OPAC, has teaching artists or, artists who are in the network. Through my experiences of visiting relatives over the past few decades, and those visits are, really, they're wonderful to, it's wonderful to see family, but they're also very hard because there are these moments, they're very highly surveilled, often temporally short moments where we can be with our loved ones, and then we go home and they go back to a cage. So there's all kinds of emotions that happen around that. And I was interested in really thinking through those emotions and trying to capture them in a way that did justice to the kind of love and also the violence of incarceration. And as I was working through that, I just got more and more interested in the vernacular photographs that take place in a visiting room. And then in many visiting rooms, you'll see art objects that are made in prisons, right?
Yes.
And so I became really interested in what were the kind of visual practices taking place inside prisons, as well as thinking about the broader visual culture of mass incarceration, like how we come to understand or make sense of prisons and criminalization through a set of kind of rehearsed images that are often propagated in the media or just like the public, through Department of Corrections or, the government. But I knew I didn't want those images to be the focus. I wanted images that really were crafted by people most impacted to be the center of the book.
That's amazing. And really, as you've said, you focused and centered the work that's made by people who are directly impacted by incarceration, people who are in prison in the book. And I would love if you could talk a little bit about what you discovered in terms of what paying attention to that artwork can do for us when we think about art as a whole. You I think make a really important argument that art made in prison actually advances and expands our knowledge of what art is. And I'd love to hear about, how did you discover that? How did you find that in building relationships with artists and looking at work and experiencing work?
So it was a the project took close to 10 years.
Yeah.
And when I started, I wasn't sure what direction it was going to take me. So I think part of it is just giving the project enough time to take shape.
Yeah.
I don't think it's something I could have done in like a year. I mean, I'm sure people can do like a sample of art in prison in a year, but I wanted it to go deeper than just like examples of the kind of art people are making. I wanted it to really encompass people's stories and experiences, and the way that art emerges over time. And so I started thinking about the conditions under which people make art in prison, and how like spatial constraints, how the experience of time as a burden, time as punishment, and then the limitations on materials, especially art materials,
yes,
really shape the kind of aesthetic horizons of people in prison. And I was also interested in how the kind of practices that are taking place in prison also speak to certain conceptual practices that are taking place in the larger art world around bringing attention to the carceral state and mass incarceration. And so I wanted to make sure I had artists who are in prison in conversation with artists like Maria Gaspar, Sable Ely Smith, Ashley Hunt. These are artists who have not been in prison, but they're thinking they've dedicated their careers to exploring the impact of carcerality on society at large, and on specific communities and families as well.
That's what that makes me sort of consider, is the way that in the art world, as well as in the broader world, prison isn't something that's over there, that's affecting someone else, that it's a part of our world, a part of our society, a part of what shapes us. And so we get an opportunity when we look at artwork made both inside and outside prison to examine that relationship and to pay attention to the way that prison shapes us.
And some of the artists in the book and who've been in prison are thinking really explicitly about those links, like Jesse Crimes, Russell Craig, James Hopp, Ronnie Goodman. These are all artists who are thinking about, art and captivity, aesthetics, and thinking about the link between, like value systems, the value systems that we place on like objects or artists who are in museums, and the devaluation of whole populations who end up in prison.
Yeah.
And I start off in chapter 1 talking about the kind of parallel relationship between prisons and museums, and how they emerge around the same time, and how often they were built to be in geographic proximity to each other as ways of educating a broader public about what to aspire to in terms of like cultural ideas of like, quote, high society, and what to fear, and the punishment of imprisonment, right? So these were kind of parallel. They operate as institutions that discipline publics in various ways, in terms of like the soft hand of art and the harsh hand of imprisonment.
So they've been in dialogue, sort of in the formation of what we think of as being America. They've been
and modern society. Yeah, a lot of yes, definitely, and not just the U.S. I mean, we see similar, similar kind of parallelism in Western Europe, and so I think this is part of like what people have framed as a quote notion of a kind of liberal democracy, and a movement away, and a kind of rise of like a kind of rational, kind of reason as a way of structuring society over, forms of corporal punishment where people would be quartered and hung in previous eras, right? So these, these are deliberate institutions that are meant to shape the public and to shape how the public engages with society at large.
That's right. And so we can learn more about one by looking at the other, and because they've always been connected.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
So, so Nicole, we think about scholarly writing as being, in the broad sort of public imagination, as being someone surrounded by sort of dusty books in a room by themselves, thinking, and I'm sure you did some of that work, sitting in a room by yourself with dusty books, but that wasn't entirely the process for you, right? You built relationships with these artists. You've built collaborations with these artists. And I'm wondering if you could just talk to one or two of those relationships and what impact they've had on you as a thinker, a scholar, a person.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, the core of the book really is the interview process.
Yeah.
So I do cite scholarly research, and I engage in academic kind of methods around how to build a study and build an argument. But over the course of the years working on the book, I interviewed about 70 currently and formerly incarcerated artists. And some of the artists were in prison when I started interviewing them, and then they've been released since. And like, for example, James Hoff is one example, Emil DeWeber. And to think about Ohio artist Tyra Patterson, I first made contact with Tyra and David Singleton of the Ohio Justice and Policy Center in 2016 or 2017, but it was before Tyra was released.
Yes.
And much of our exchanges was either through David or sending messages through JPay, and she's sending images of her art. And another artist I built a relationship with, also Ohio based and also involved in kind of criminal legal reform work, there is Dean Gillespie,
yes,
who was in prison for 20 years and created these elaborate miniatures during the time he was in prison. And he was imprisoned with my cousin Alan. So I met Dean actually through my cousin Alan. So the personal and professional relationships for me are interwoven, and they're interwoven to me in a way that's really deeply meaningful for me, because I feel like this project brought like all aspects of my life together. So it wasn't just academic, it wasn't just personal, it wasn't just like my own political activist work. So I felt like all those aspects were able to come together, and I think that I feel them through the kind of friendships and alliances that I've built with artists and organizations over the course of time.
So it's been a process of building collaborations and activist work and sort of platforms to amplify the stories,
programming, yes, also like programming and archive, and and it's also just like archiving work.
Yeah,
many of the artists didn't have images or high quality images of their work, so I did some travel. I hired photographers like to document work, and so there was all this other level of kind of behind the scenes work that I engaged in to be able to produce the book, and also to do exhibitions around the work.
That's really amazing. And that brings us back to the beginning, which is this MoMA PS1 exhibition, which hopefully will be live and available to visit in person in the fall. But we'll put a link in the comments on the Facebook live stream for the description of that exhibition and some examples of some of the work that will be included in the exhibition, as well as links to how to get your hands on a copy of this book. I have my hands on a copy of this book right now.
Yay!
Here it is. Yes.
Thank you.
And of course, a pleasure. So anyone who's listening out there can get a copy as well. And you can there will be some links to images and so forth of some of the artists that we've talked about here. But Nicole, as sort of a way of wrapping up this sort of quote unquote formal portion, we would love to end sort of with a moment of reflection on one of the pieces that you included in the book. And just a note for everybody out there, you can join us on Talkback. We're going to just roll this conversation right over into a Zoom call. You can get to the Zoom call by clicking on the link in the comments. But tell us about the piece that we're going to have a look at now.
And is it Gilberto Rivera's work?
Yes, it is.
Okay, oh, great. Yeah, so Gilberto is one of the artists in the book, and he, one of the things, there are many things that I really admire about his practice and about him as an individual. He was part of a collective when he was in federal prison in New Jersey at Ferriton with Jesse Crimes and Jared Owens. And I used their relationship as a way of thinking about how collectivity is cultivated in prison, especially through art, and that art making becomes one of the central sites where you see kind of multiracial collaboration, because many people who are familiar with prisons know that prisons can be highly segregated spaces that have almost an apartheid system. And art becomes this kind of safe space where you see collaboration often taking place across racial and ethnic lines. And Jared, Gilberto, and Jesse are an example of that. Gilberto is Puerto Rican, and he created an institutional nightmare largely as part of this kind of like one aesthetic experimentation that he, Jared, and Jesse were involved in, where they were more interested in doing conceptual art. And so they were pushing each other. They were challenging each other to do more conceptual work. At the same time, Gilberto was being really violently, I would say, surveilled inside prisons because he was identified. He had been labeled a gang member. So almost all of the art he made was like highly scrutinized for gang symbols. Some of it was confiscated. And out of frustration, he made an institutional nightmare to reflect his own experience. But it was also a way of appropriating state material. So he takes his prison uniform and he turns it into like material for art making. He also incorporates wax for mopping, because that was the job he did in prison. So he takes his the experience of being a punitive captivity and turn it into this really thoughtful mixed media collage painting.
So it's both sort of experimental in nature for the artist. It's a response to the sort of collaborative development of a group of artists and one person's experiment with that, and it's an example of resourcefulness. It's an example of
using and also a reflection of his deep personal experience, right? So it's all those things coming together.
Nicole, thank you so much. This has been really just rejuvenating to be able to hear you speak about the story of creating this book. As you said, it's longer than you intended, but it's a really beautiful read and very much worth attending to deeply. And that's what I'm doing right now, attending to it in little pieces deeply.
Thank you. And if people want to purchase the book, I recommend they go to through their local bookstore.
That's great.
And if they're in an area where there's not a local bookstore, Bookshop is a really great site that supports independent bookstores.
Excellent. Bookshop supports independent bookstores. It's a great place to get the book. We've also, I think, put a link directly to the Harvard University Press.
Absolutely. And Artbook PS1 is another place to get it. Artbook PS1, I know they were offering like a 10% discount and free shipping for a while.
That's brilliant. Thank you. I hope a bunch of people who are with us right now will head there. But before you head there, please click on the Zoom link in the comments to join us for a little bit of a longer, more casual question and answer session with Nicole. Nicole, thank you so much for being a part of our
Thank you. This is great.
Live stream
I really
Radio
appreciate
OPAC.
The questions.
I am really appreciative of you and of the work that you've done to, as we said, sort of create sort of a multi-layered platform to share the stories of these pieces and these artists. So thank you. All right, thank you so much also anyone out there for being with us as well. This has been Radio OPAC. Join us next week to talk with Evan Rausch. But before that, join us on the Zoom call talkback. Link in the comments. Thanks so much. Have a great day.